Pierce Brosnan ignited a global cinematic hegemony through a $1.5 billion franchise, but a $5 billion corporate merger liquidated a total career legacy with a single telephone call. The image of the sophisticated spy acts as a facade, masking a reality defined by systemic displacement and a lifelong pursuit of autonomy. Behind the architectural precision of the tuxedo resides a solitary Irish outsider. Nicknames like Irish and memories of Navan boarding houses shaped the foundation of a career built on resilience, and the result manifested as a trade of fire-eating workshops for international stardom. Discovery of the truth behind the Bond tenure reveals why the face of a premier global asset found more peace in a $1.4 million painting than a blockbuster contract. How did the world's most bankable spy found refuge in the protection of the Pacific gray whale? Why did the man in the tuxedo remain completely alone?
Navan County Meath served as the quiet, rain-soaked backdrop for a boy standing by the River Boyne when his world fell apart. Drogheda was where it all started on May 16, 1953, but the home life he entered was defined by Ireland struggling with poverty and a massive exodus of its people. Thomas, his father, earned his living as a carpenter, but walked out of the house when Pierce was still an infant, leaving behind a silence that would last for decades. By the time he turned 4, his mother May relocated to London to work as a nurse. Pierce matured under the watchful eyes of his grandparents, Philip and Kathleen. After they passed away, the boy was shuffled between aunts, uncles, and a boarding house run by a woman named Eileen. Hallways felt cold. He later described his childhood as a solitary struggle within a Catholic system that looked down on broken marriages.
Stephanie Rains looks into this kind of displacement in her book, Diasporic Ethnicity, Irish-American Performativity of Irishness in Popular Culture, 1945 to 2000. And she describes how the mid-century Irish experience relied on negotiated identities, where children were left behind during national rituals of abandonment. Solitary years followed. Young Pierce navigated a world defined by a missing marriage and a father who wasn't there, and that forced him to find comfort in the rituals of being an altar boy for the De La Salle brothers. August 12, 1964 was the date he finally boarded a plane to Scotland to see a mother he barely knew anymore, and that's when everything shifted. He landed in a massive city that treated him like a stranger. Classmates at the Elliott School in Putney gave him a name he would never forget: Irish. He spent his teenage years fighting to keep his dignity in a city that made him feel like an outsider. And that's when he discovered a fire-eating workshop at the Oval House. Watching a street performer show a group of people how to tame flames was a liberation that felt more real than any classroom. It set him on a path toward the Drama Centre London. Before he ever wore a tuxedo, he was a commercial illustrator training at St. Martin's School of Art. But the stage was where he finally found the family he had lost. In 1986, a single administrative decision by a network executive derailed what should have been one of the biggest casting successes in the history of cinema. Roger Ebert had finally stepped away from his license to kill, and the producers at Eon Productions firmly set their sights on a young man who already felt like a natural fit for the part. The suit fit him perfectly. Pierce Brosnan received the official offer to become the next James Bond, a career-defining moment that promised to launch him into the stratosphere of global fame. But here's the thing about the entertainment industry. The fine print in a contract often holds more power than the creative vision of any filmmaker. NBC recently canceled Remington Steele because of low ratings, which meant their leading man finally felt free to pursue a life of high-stakes espionage in London. What nobody expected was how the mere announcement of his new role would create such a massive spike in public interest that the network decided to reconsider their entire strategy. Spikes in viewership suddenly made the detective series look like a viable asset again, and that's when the legal trap began to close on the young actor. NBC held a contract containing a specific 60-day option that allowed them to reverse their cancellation if they found a reason to keep the show on the air. Executives watched the news cycle explode with stories about their star becoming 007, and the result manifested as a calculated maneuver to protect their property by exercising that very option at the last possible second. This technicality forced Brosnan to return to the set for a final truncated season, effectively killing his chance to step into the tuxedo during the peak of his physical prime. Contractual obligations carry a heavy weight in Hollywood. The burden of this specific document cost him a decade of work with the most famous franchise on the planet. Timothy Dalton eventually stepped in to fill the void, and while he offered a much grittier take on the character, the audience remained wondering what might have been. Only 60 days separated the actor from a life of international superstardom. This tiny window of time changed everything, and it turned a professional victory into a public frustration that followed Brosnan through several years of less successful projects. He found himself trapped in a detective persona that he had already outgrown, which meant watching from the sidelines as the spy world moved forward without him. A professional anomaly like this remained unresolved until 1994, but the scars from that missed opportunity shaped how he handled his career from that point onward. What appeared to be a straightforward climb to the top became a lesson in corporate ruthlessness, and the result manifested as a delay that almost cost the world its most iconic version of the modern agent.
Christoph Linder observes in his book, The James Bond Phenomenon, that the character functions as a contested site of negotiation, which means the fictional spy acts as the primary arena for sorting out national anxieties and global hierarchies. Stardom in the 90s required a delicate balance of post-imperial fantasy and modern sensitivity, and that's when the tuxedo transformed from a simple costume into a rigid structural requirement for the actor's survival. Ireland's most famous export suddenly had to navigate a geopolitical fiction where the British Empire still held agency through secret aberrations. Negotiating this identity meant Brosnan could not just play a role, he had to embody a globalized commodity that saved the studio from financial ruin.
GoldenEye pulled in $350 million during its initial theatrical run, a number that proved the world wasn't finished with 007 just because the Berlin Wall had fallen. By the time his final outing, Die Another Day, arrived in 2002, the worldwide gross sat at nearly $500 million. Salaries for the leading man reflected this massive return on investment, starting at $4 million for his debut and climbing to $16.5 million for his fourth film. This massive financial success masked a growing creative frustration that built up inside the actor's trailer. He later admitted to loathing the one-liners, those short bursts of scripted wit that made him feel like he was performing a hollow caricature of masculinity. But here's the thing about the hegemony of the suit. The more perfect the outer shell appeared, the more the human underneath started to fracture. Lindner points out that the increasingly absurd gadgetry, from invisible cars to remote-controlled sedans, created an environment of techno-fetishism that pushed the performance toward the edge of absurdity. This shift meant the actor was effectively trapped by his own popularity, and the problem was that he never felt like he had complete ownership over the character. While the public celebrated the invincible hero, the man behind the mask was using a different medium to process a reality that no amount of movie magic could fix. The colors of the cinema were becoming too bright, and that's when he turned to the darkness of the canvas to survive. While the global audience watched him navigate the smooth mechanics of a high-stakes thriller, his reality at home in 1987 began to dissolve into a 4-year struggle against a terminal diagnosis. Cassandra Harris received her ovarian cancer news just as his career reached a fresh peak, and the result was a systemic split between the suave instrument of global espionage and the man desperate for any kind of relief. Finding peace on a film set proved impossible. That's when he returned to a primal discipline he first discovered as a teenage student in South London. Standing before a blank canvas in the late 80s, he used his fingers to claw through a dark rage and a fractured pain that no studio script could ever hope to articulate. The actor described this process as a way to map an inner life that the public mask simply couldn't touch, and the result manifested as a bold, figurative style where every stroke acted as a release for the pressure of his public duties. The colors spoke for him. This private sanctuary allowed him to process the possibility of death while the world demanded he remain an ageless hero, and that's when the paint became more than a simple distraction. The sum of $1.4 million is what a single portrait of Bob Dylan painted by the actor fetched at a charity auction in 2018, and that's when his private therapy finally transitioned into a legitimate economic power. Social psychologist George Herbert Mead argued that humans live in a state of entropy between the veridical self and the self seen by others, and for a celebrity of this magnitude, the gap between those identities can feel like a literal void. The numbers didn't lie. This massive sale proved that his artistic sovereignty was no mere celebrity side project. But here's the thing, even a successful art career couldn't provide the total autonomy he needed to escape the constraints of a major film studio. Global fame during the Bond years turned Pierce Brosnan into a high-value corporate asset, but the internal architecture of his career felt restricted and fragile.
Establishing Irish Dreamtime alongside Beau St. Clair acted as a calculated survival strategy, and that changed when he decided to stop being a simple tenant in a studio's empire. 1996 was the year he launched this quest for artistic sovereignty. Stupid one-liners were the primary creative diet the 007 machine fed him, which meant he felt like a hollow instrument of the brand rather than a maturing actor. This company provided the antidote.
Wicklow Head served as the rain-soaked location for their debut production, The Nephew, a film that traded polished high-stakes gadgets for an atmospheric story set on the Irish coast. Supporting young writers and directors became a core mission for the fledgling studio. But here's the thing about Hollywood: creative integrity alone rarely pays the bills. Brosnan required a hit to prove his bankability outside of the secret agent archetype. What nobody expected was the massive success of the 1999 remake of the Thomas Crown Affair.
A total of $124 million poured into the global box office for that single film, and the result was a fundamental proof of concept for his independent ambitions. Sovereignty finally felt real. Fact-based dramas like Evelyn challenged the custody laws of the Irish state, and this is where it gets better, because he eventually earned a Golden Globe nomination for subverting his own image in the black comedy The Matador. Acting and producing roles now moved hand in hand. Reinvesting his earnings into the soil of his homeland gave him a sense of ownership that 1,000 Bond sequels never could. He had built a professional fortress to protect his identity, but a massive liquidation event was already being planned behind closed doors in Tokyo and Los Angeles.
In 1995, the Mitsubishi Corporation partnered with the Mexican government to propose a massive salt factory at Laguna San Ignacio, which happened to be the last pristine breeding ground for the Pacific gray whale. This blue lagoon on the Baja California peninsula served as a sanctuary for mothers and their calves. But here's the thing: the industrial plan included a mile-long pier that would have sliced directly through their migration route. Protecting these animals became a personal mission for Pierce and Brosnan, and that's when they joined forces with the Natural Resources Defense Council to launch a systemic counteroffensive. 30,400,000 mailers flooded into American homes to shock the public consciousness. The result was a membership surge that propelled the organization to the forefront of global environmental warfare. Success on this level saved more than just the whales. Membership growth from 175,000 to over 450,000 people happened almost overnight. And that's when the financial side of that victory provided a $20 million windfall directly tied to the gray whale campaign. A massive influx of capital transformed a relatively obscure group into a powerhouse capable of fighting multinational interests on equal footing. Mikhail Gorbachev personally presented the actor with the Environmental Leadership Award in 1997. His words described the star as a committed leader whose clever voice provided the friction needed to halt a global industrial machine. He later partnered with organizations like Sea Shepherd to oppose sonar systems that kill marine mammals. That changed when he realized that his celebrity was a fundamental tool for systemic change.
Standing against a multinational hegemony required more than just fame. It demanded a willingness to endure the dark rage of corporate lawsuits and public scrutiny. The architecture of his advocacy relied on data, which meant he realized that few actors were willing to risk their commercial viability for such a polarizing cause. Laguna San Ignacio remains pristine today because of this intervention. What nobody expected was that while he saved a species, his own professional stability was about to be audited by a system that valued numbers over legacy. In 2004, the structural stability of the Brosnan era suffered a total collapse during a period that remains one of the most jarring anomalies in Hollywood history. A leading man faced immediate liquidation at the exact peak of his commercial power. $431 million flowed into the global box office from Die Another Day, which stood as the most successful entry in the series' 40-year history. Success typically buys loyalty in a capitalist system. This specific success meant nothing to the boardrooms managing the $5 billion merger between Sony and MGM. Investment groups viewed the star as an overpriced legacy asset rather than the heart of a franchise, and that's when a creative reset looked more profitable than paying his $20 million salary. The end arrived via the cold digital chirp of a telephone while Brosnan worked on a project in the Bahamas. Barbara Broccoli and Michael G. Wilson delivered a message that was devastatingly succinct. They decided to move on. In an instant, the architecture of a decade vanished. Toby Miller observes in his analysis of Bondian conundrums that the character often functions as an empty signifier within the political economy of masculinity.
Brosnan served as a vessel for commercial goals that no longer matched the studio's desire for blue-collar brutality. The system utilized his suave persona to generate $1.5 billion in revenue, which meant that same system now treated that persona as an obstacle to the 21st century. Gritty realism became the new priority for the producers. That's when the fired spy realized his tenure represented a temporary arrangement, despite the massive profits. He stood in the wreckage of the career he assumed was secure. But here's the thing. Losing the suit allowed him to finally start building something that belonged entirely to him.
Aging archetypes often suggest a slow fade into nostalgia, but the current reality for Pierce Brosnan involves a systemic engineering of a professional rebirth. The Last Rifleman featured his portrayal of Artie Crawford in 2023, and that's when the industry recognized a fresh, raw vulnerability in the former action star. Nominations arrived quickly, and the result was a 2024 IFTA nod for Best Lead Actor that signaled his transition into the elder statesman phase of his career. 2026 brought another IFTA nomination for his work as the calculating crime boss Conrad Harrigan in the Paramount series Mobland. Reading Jail served as a filming location for the second season in February of 2026, and that's when production trailers were spotted near the historic jail as the actor filmed intense scenes with his right-hand man, Emmett Scanlon. What nobody expected was the scale of his return to the action genre through the Cliffhanger reboot.
An 8-figure distribution deal at the Toronto International Film Festival secured a massive 3,000-screen theatrical release for August 28, 2026. Dolomite's Peaks provided the grueling backdrop for his role as Ray Cooper, a mountaineer fighting to save his family from kidnappers. And this is where it gets interesting, because the producers already locked in a sequel before the first film even hit theaters. Sheffield was the setting for his other major 2026 project titled Giant, where he appeared unrecognizable with wispy white hair and glasses to play the Irish boxing trainer Brendan Ingle. The result was a January 9th release that critics described as a crowd pleaser, and this momentum carried into the streaming world when 4 Letters of Love arrived on Paramount Plus on February 1st. Olea launched an AI tool called Ollie, with Brosnan serving as a shareholder, which meant his artistic side merged with technological discovery through spatial audio and iPad interfaces. March 14, 2026 marks the world premiere of his thriller War Driver at the CineQuest Film Festival in San Jose. Resurgence on this level proves the icon has effectively dismantled the Bondian architecture to build a multi-platform legacy on his own terms.
The journey of Pierce Brosnan proves that personal sovereignty creates a more lasting legacy than any movie role or billion-dollar box office haul. Naven provided the 0 point of displacement, but those early years in Ireland eventually anchored a career that refused to be defined by a corporate brand. Stardom served as a useful distraction. Generating $1.5 billion for a single franchise allowed him to buy the creative freedom he needed for his true interests in visual art and marine conservation, and that's when the mask finally started to slip.
August 28, 2026 marks the national release of the Cliffhanger reboot on 3,000 screens, which means the actor is reclaiming his position at the summit of the action genre. Success looks different this time around. IFTA voters recognized his work in Mobland and The Last Rifleman, and that's when the industry realized his late career resurgence relied on character-driven stories rather than pyrotechnic spectacle. Reading Jail provided the setting for his recent television work. Managing his portfolio through the AI-powered Ollie tool, or appearing unrecognizable in the boxing biopic Giant, shows a man who has successfully dismantled the hegemony of the suit. Invincibility looked like a mirage designed by movie studios to sell tickets, but the real strength of the Irish actor lay in his willingness to remain vulnerable. We spent decades watching a professional pretend to be cold and ruthless. But here's the thing. The fire eater from the Oval House never actually left the building. He proves that wearing a tuxedo is just a performance, and the result is a rare example of a human being who survived the machinery of Hollywood with his soul intact. We are left to consider if we lost the last icon who understood how to stay at the table without letting the game change who he was.